Case 1. On December 23, 2023, in Friendswood, Texas, 17-year-old Connor Hilton invited two close friends to his home. What was expected to be a typical hangout ended in violence. Hilton opened fire with an AR-15 rifle, killing Ethan Riley and seriously injuring Benjamin Bleek. Investigators stated Hilton showed no signs of panic or confusion after the act. In his confession, Hilton admitted he had wanted to kill someone for a long time, revealing this wasn't spontaneous. It had been considered. The crime stunned the community, especially given the calculated nature of the attack. At the scene, Hilton shot Riley and Bleek without warning. The shooting occurred in his own home, during a gathering framed as casual. Ethan Riley died from multiple gunshot wounds, while Bleek was left with severe injuries. Neighbors reported no indication of struggle beforehand. Hilton remained on the property and did not attempt to hide evidence or flee. The weapon was located nearby. Surveillance footage from neighboring homes confirmed the boys had arrived willingly, with no signs of forced entry or danger. The planned betrayal of trust made the crime more chilling. From the beginning, authorities suspected premeditation. Ethan Riley and Benjamin Bleek had known Hilton since early high school. Friends described them as a tight-knit group. Riley was involved in extracurriculars and known for his positive energy. Bleek survived but required multiple surgeries. None of Hilton's teachers or peers reported warning signs. He was seen as quiet but polite. His online presence showed no overt signs of violence or instability. The shooting came as a complete surprise to classmates and faculty. Hilton's betrayal was particularly hard to grasp, given the years-long friendship between the boys. The idea that Hilton could conceal such intent over time disturbed the entire community. The investigation revealed Hilton had retrieved the AR-15 from inside his home and waited until both victims were in close range. He fired with precision. The rifle was legally owned by a family member. Forensics found no signs of struggle from Riley, suggesting the attack was swift. Bleek's wounds indicated he attempted to flee or resist after the first shots were fired. Hilton confessed on the scene and later gave detectives a detailed account of his motivations. He claimed he wanted to know what it felt like to kill and chose people he knew because it would be easier. These statements eliminated doubt about motive. Hilton was arrested at the scene without resistance. He was taken into custody and charged with murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. In interviews, he did not display remorse. When asked why he chose to kill that day, Hilton responded that he had felt ready. His statements showed he had been thinking about committing a murder for some time. The defense team initially explored whether medication for acne, Accutane, might have contributed to his behavior. But prosecutors pointed to his detailed confessions and planning as clear signs of intent. The court ruled out diminished capacity based on medical testimony. In September 2025, Hilton pleaded guilty, avoiding a public trial. He received a 50-year sentence for murder and 20 years for assault, to be served concurrently. Under Texas law, he will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years. The courtroom remained silent as families listened to the sentence. Bleek, the surviving victim, addressed Hilton directly, questioning his tears in court as performative. Riley's parents described the enduring pain of losing their son and the betrayal by someone they welcomed into their home. The case was covered widely in state media, cited as an example of hidden violence and the unpredictability of adolescent offenders. Case 2. In 2017, London police uncovered one of the most disturbing terror plots ever involving a minor. Safa Buller, a teenager influenced by ISIS ideology, planned to detonate grenades and carry out knife attacks at the British Museum. She was only 17 years old when she became the center of the UK's youngest all-female terror cell. Investigators later confirmed that her motivation stemmed from online radicalization. The plot, though stopped in time, revealed how digital extremism could turn a quiet teenager into a willing instrument of mass violence. The case began when MI5 analysts intercepted coded online messages referring to an event described as a tea party. The phrasing seemed harmless but triggered suspicion after it appeared repeatedly in encrypted chat rooms known for extremist activity. Counterterrorism units began monitoring the sender, who was traced to Bueller's London address. Within days, agents identified communications detailing weapon acquisition and public targets. The decision to strike was made after she received instructions for assembling homemade explosives. When officers raided her home, they discovered handwritten plans outlining a public attack in Central London. The early interception prevented what authorities called a mass casualty event. Bueller's path to radicalization began online at age 16. She spent hours watching extremist propaganda and communicating with individuals posing as mentors. Her social media history revealed a gradual transformation from curiosity to ideology. At home, she lived with her mother and sister, both later implicated for their involvement. The sisters maintained regular contact with overseas recruiters who promised them purpose and sacrifice. Friends described Bueller as quiet and withdrawn before the arrest, with no overt signs of extremism. Yet investigators found digital evidence showing she had already pledged allegiance to ISIS, viewing herself as part of a broader cause. Her radicalization reflected how easily ideology could infiltrate ordinary homes through digital networks. Surveillance footage and phone records confirmed consistent communication between Bueller and a known ISIS operative based abroad. The encrypted chats detailed her intent to target large crowds at the British Museum during peak visiting hours. Investigators decrypted several messages that outlined attack methods, including the use of pressure cooker explosives and close-range knife assaults. The coordination between her sister, and another woman demonstrated a structured attempt to carry out simultaneous acts of terror. MI5 officials described the level of organization as unprecedented for an individual of her age. Every recovered message reinforced the seriousness of the plot and the precision of its planning. Police arrested Safa Bueller before the attack could occur. During the raid, counterterrorism officers found her devices still active in encrypted chat applications. The recovered messages contained final instructions from an overseas contact urging her to act immediately. Bueller and her family were taken into custody under the UK's Terrorism Act. During court proceedings, prosecutors presented surveillance footage, recovered documents, and online correspondence linking her directly to recruitment networks. The defense acknowledged her involvement but emphasized her youth and influence by manipulative figures online. Despite this, the court determined her actions demonstrated full awareness of the consequences. In 2018, Bueller was convicted of preparing acts of terrorism. The judge called the case a warning of how digital platforms could be weaponized for ideological recruitment. She received a life sentence with a minimum term of 13 years before eligibility for parole. At sentencing, the court highlighted her age but also the gravity of her intentions. Bueller remains the youngest woman in the UK ever convicted for plotting a terror attack. Her case reshaped how British counterterrorism agencies approach youth radicalization and online extremism, marking a pivotal moment in national security policy. The planned attack never took place, but its exposure left a lasting imprint on how early digital signals of extremism are now treated as potential threats. Case 3. In May 2024, the quiet city of Casper, Wyoming, became the scene of a calculated killing that stunned the community. 17-year-old Evan Castiner had been stalking his ex-girlfriend, 18-year-old Lana Brown, for weeks after she ended their relationship. On a calm spring afternoon, he confronted her near a neighborhood park and shot her execution style at close range. Witnesses reported hearing a single gunshot followed by silence. When officers arrived, Brown was found lying on the walking path with fatal injuries. The investigation quickly revealed that the act had been planned, not impulsive. The events leading to the murder began days earlier when Castiner sent Brown a series of threatening messages. In them, he accused her of humiliating him and warned that she would regret ending the relationship. Friends of Brown urged her to report the messages, but she hesitated, believing he was venting frustration rather than making a credible threat. On the evening of May 14, Brown went for a walk near a public park as part of her usual routine. Surveillance footage later showed Castiner's car circling the area multiple times before stopping along her route. Moments later, Brown was shot once in the head. The precision and lack of hesitation pointed to deliberate intent. Lana Brown was a recent high school graduate with plans to attend community college in the fall. She was known for her easygoing nature and close friendships. Those who knew her described her as kind and trusting, someone who avoided confrontation. Her relationship with Castiner had lasted nearly a year before ending quietly in early April. Friends later told investigators that she had grown increasingly uncomfortable with his controlling behavior. Despite clear signs of obsession, there was no history of police reports or restraining orders. Brown's family later said she underestimated his unstable ID, unaware of the depth of his anger. Detectives obtained search warrants for Castiner's phone and vehicle within hours of the shooting. Digital forensic analysis revealed that he had tracked Brown's movements using a location-sharing app she had forgotten to disable. GPS data placed him at the crime scene minutes before the shooting. Text messages, internet searches about clean gunshot execution, and how to erase GPS history, and deleted photos of Brown were all recovered. A spent cartridge found near the body matched the handgun seized from his home. Police concluded that Castiner had followed Brown for several days, waiting for an opportunity when she was alone. The timeline eliminated any notion of spontaneity. Castiner was arrested at his residence without incident less than 12 hours after the shooting. During questioning, he showed no visible emotion and admitted to the crime in a detached tone. When detectives asked why he had done it, he replied that he wanted her to feel what he felt. There were no signs of remorse throughout the interviews. Psychologists who evaluated him later described his demeanor as cold and analytical, displaying traits consistent with antisocial behavior. Prosecutors argued that his confession demonstrated premeditation rather than emotional breakdown. The case was built almost entirely on his own words, combined with overwhelming digital evidence. In February 2025, Castiner was sentenced to serve 42 to 75 years in state prison for first-degree murder and weapons charges. The court rejected any plea for leniency based on his age, citing the deliberate nature of his actions. During sentencing, Brown's family urged the public to take online threats seriously, emphasizing how easily warnings can be dismissed until it is too late. The case became a reference point in Wyoming for discussions around digital stalking and teenage relationship violence. For the community, the murder of Lana Brown was a reminder that danger can emerge quietly from someone once considered safe. Case 4. In March 2019, the small town of Ross-on-Wye in Herefordshire was shaken by the discovery of a newborn's body inside a household bin bag. 19-year-old Paris Mayo had secretly given birth at home and suffocated the infant shortly after delivery. She hid the body in a plastic bag and left it for her family to find. The event revealed a tragedy concealed behind closed doors, one that combined secrecy, fear, and deliberate intent. When questioned, Mayo claimed she hadn't realized she was pregnant, a statement soon challenged by investigators. The case began when Mayo's family discovered the infant's remains the morning after the birth. Her mother found the bag while cleaning and called authorities immediately. Paramedics and police arrived at the scene, confirming that the baby had been deceased for several hours. Mayo appeared pale and disoriented, insisting she had been unaware of the pregnancy and believed the baby was stillborn. Detectives noted inconsistencies in her account, especially the state of concealment and the absence of panic that would typically accompany a medical emergency. The discovery initiated a detailed forensic investigation, revealing evidence that contradicted her initial explanation. Paris Mayo lived at home with her parents and younger brother. Friends described her as reserved, with few close social contacts. Throughout the pregnancy, she continued her daily routine and concealed physical changes by wearing loose clothing. No one in her family suspected she was expecting a child. Medical records showed she had not attended any prenatal appointments or sought healthcare advice. Investigators later determined that the father of the child was an older man, though he was not implicated in the crime. The hidden pregnancy, coupled with her calm demeanor after birth, led police to suspect an intentional act rather than a panic-driven reaction. The post-mortem examination provided critical findings. The infant had suffered severe head trauma, including multiple skull fractures, consistent with blunt force impact shortly after birth. There were also clear signs of suffocation. DNA tests confirmed Mayo as the biological mother, eliminating any doubt. Digital forensics recovered online searches from her phone related to late-term pregnancy symptoms and concealment. The data showed she had knowledge of her condition well before the birth, contradicting her claims of ignorance. Detectives also found deleted text messages indicating fear of family reaction if the pregnancy were revealed. Each new detail pointed toward a deliberate attempt to hide both the pregnancy and its fatal outcome. Mayo was arrested on suspicion of murder and later charged with infanticide. During questioning, she maintained that she believed the baby was stillborn and acted in panic. However, the prosecution argued that her actions, the suffocation, concealment, and failure to seek medical assistance, demonstrated premeditation. Expert testimony from medical professionals confirmed the baby had been born alive and healthy. The court concluded that Mayo's behavior after the birth, including her methodical concealment, ruled out temporary insanity or loss of control. Her statements to police were found to be inconsistent, and the physical evidence directly contradicted her narrative. In June 2023, Paris Mayo was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 12 years before eligibility for parole. The judge described the case as a devastating combination of secrecy and cruelty. The ruling highlighted the legal distinction between infanticide and intentional homicide, emphasizing that evidence supported the latter. In 2025, her defense team filed an appeal, arguing that her mental state and age at the time warranted reconsideration of the sentence. The case continues to draw public attention, raising complex questions about denial of pregnancy, adolescent psychology, and accountability in crimes involving newborns. Case 5. May 2019, Wiltshire. 17-year-old Thomas Griffiths traveled to the home of his former girlfriend, Ellie Good, and stabbed her 13 times. The attack occurred after a recent breakup. When officers arrived, the scene suggested extreme violence and a single assailant. Initial observations included multiple puncture wounds and blood spatter patterns inconsistent with an accidental injury. Investigators noted that the severity and number of wounds pointed to an intent to kill rather than an isolated outburst. The presence of staging elements at the scene immediately raised questions about the account later offered by the defendant. Good's body was discovered with a knife positioned as if self-inflicted, and Griffiths initially claimed he had come upon a scene of self-harm. Emergency responders described the placement of the weapon and the victim's posture as atypical for a self-inflicted wound. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices earlier in the evening, but did not report seeing a forced entry. Forensic teams documented the scene extensively, recording blood spatter, wound trajectories, and the location of a discarded phone. The purported self-harm explanation prompted investigators to scrutinize both physical evidence and the defendant's narrative for inconsistencies that might indicate staging. Ellie Good had recently ended a relationship with Griffiths after a period of escalating conflict. Witness statements described a volatile dynamic in the final weeks before the attack, with arguments and warnings from peers about his instability. Good was remembered by friends and family as cautious following the breakup, taking steps to limit contact. Griffiths had a documented history of substance use and previous incidents that suggested difficulty managing anger. Those who knew him described him as capable of intense emotional responses. The relationship context, combined with prior behavioral indicators, framed the attack as the culmination of escalating tension rather than an isolated incident. Forensic analysis produced key contradictions to Griffiths' initial claim. Medical examiners detailed defensive wounds on the victim that indicated a struggle, and analysts determined that several of Griffiths' injuries were self-inflicted in a manner inconsistent with immediate intervention. Blood spatter analysis placed the primary assault at a location within the home where Griffiths admitted he had been present. Trace evidence connected Griffiths to the weapon and the scene in ways that undermined the self-harm narrative. Investigators also recovered phone records showing deleted messages and searches consistent with planning or cover-up. The totality of physical and digital evidence suggested the scene had been intentionally altered to mislead authorities. Confronted with forensic inconsistencies, Griffiths provided a subsequent statement admitting his involvement in the attack. He described a confrontation that escalated into violence, then acknowledged efforts to stage the scene to support an alternate explanation. The confession followed detailed questioning about wound patterns and the physical impossibility of his initial account. Arrest procedures were carried out promptly after the statement, and Griffiths was taken into custody without resistance. Prosecutors emphasized the confession and the forensic linkage when filing charges, framing the case as premeditated assault culminating in homicide. At trial, the court weighed the forensic record, witness testimony, and Griffiths' admissions. The jury found him guilty of murder. Sentencing reflected both the brutality of the attack and his age at the time, resulting in a life sentence with a minimum term of 12.5 years before eligibility for parole. In the wake of the verdict, Good's family and local advocates called for strengthened protections and education regarding domestic violence among young people. Campaigns citing the case argued for clearer reporting mechanisms and better support for those exiting volatile relationships. The conviction and its aftermath sustained public attention on the risks posed by intimate partner violence in adolescent populations. Case 6. November 2009, South Dakota. Maricela Nicolasa Diaz, a teenage girl and her boyfriend carried out a brutal murder that would leave an entire community shaken. Their victim was 16-year-old Jasmine Guevara, who was found stabbed multiple times and burned in a remote area. The level of violence and deliberate concealment led investigators to believe this was a crime driven by emotion and planned aggression. What appeared at first to be a senseless attack soon revealed the dangerous undercurrents of jealousy and manipulation that had brewed beneath the surface of a teenage social circle. Jasmine's body was discovered in a secluded area, partially burned and bearing numerous stab wounds. The brutality shocked even seasoned investigators. Initial confusion surrounded the cause and context of her death, but forensic examination revealed that the injuries had been inflicted before the fire was set, ruling out any accidental involvement. Evidence at the scene, along with witness statements, quickly pointed to Maricela and her boyfriend as persons of interest. Their behavior in the days following the murder raised red flags, particularly their inconsistent accounts and apparent lack of remorse. Jasmine had known Diaz socially through mutual connections at school. There had been previous signs of tension and jealousy, particularly surrounding Diaz's relationship. Witnesses recalled hostile remarks and minor conflicts that escalated over time. Investigators later concluded that Diaz viewed Jasmine as a threat to her relationship, and that the murder had been a calculated act of control and elimination. The motive was not one of random violence, but of deep-seated envy and emotional obsession. The social environment around the teens, marked by rivalry and secrecy, served as a toxic backdrop for the crime. Authorities obtained a confession early in the investigation, with Diaz detailing her role in the killing and implicating her boyfriend. However, as the case progressed, Diaz attempted to recant portions of her confession, claiming coercion and misunderstanding. The defense argued that she was under emotional duress and possibly manipulated by her partner. Despite these claims, the forensic evidence, including matching DNA and eyewitness testimony, corroborated her original statements. Appeals citing interrogation issues were filed, but ultimately rejected by the courts, affirming the strength of the initial confession and the surrounding case facts. Diaz was charged and tried as an adult due to the severity of the crime. Despite her age at the time of the murder, the prosecution successfully argued that the brutality and premeditation warranted adult sentencing. In 2015, she was sentenced to 80 years in prison with parole eligibility after 40 years. The boyfriend received a similar sentence. The case was widely publicized in South Dakota and sparked discussions about teenage violence, peer influence, and the psychological vulnerability of adolescents under toxic emotional pressure. It remains one of the most disturbing juvenile crime cases in the state's history. Case 7. April 2021, Las Vegas. In a crime that shocked the community and gained national attention, Sierra Halseth, a teenager, conspired with her boyfriend to kill her father, Daniel Halseth. After brutally stabbing and setting him on fire, the couple was seen in a disturbing video, laughing and joking about the murder while documenting their escape. The lack of remorse and cold detachment from reality captured on camera became a chilling centerpiece of the investigation and eventual sentencing. What began as a family conflict over a forbidden relationship ended in one of Nevada's most disturbing domestic murder cases. The attack was triggered by escalating tensions between Sierra and her father over her relationship with her boyfriend. Daniel Halseth, a former Nevada state senator, had grown increasingly concerned about the influence of Sierra's boyfriend and had taken steps to separate the two, including limiting contact and enforcing strict boundaries at home. On the day of the murder, the couple carried out a premeditated attack, stabbing Daniel multiple times before setting fire to the home in an attempt to destroy evidence. The body was discovered after the fire department responded to the blaze. By then, Sierra and her boyfriend had already fled the scene. Daniel Halseth was a well-known figure in Nevada politics, respected for his past role as a state senator and known as a devoted father. He had recently expressed concerns about his daughter's well-being and her increasingly rebellious behavior. Friends and family described Daniel as strict but protective. His objection to the relationship was rooted in fear for Sierra's safety and emotional health. The murder shattered a family and ignited conversations about teen relationships, manipulation, and the limits of parental control. The betrayal by his own daughter added another layer of horror to an already tragic case. Police quickly uncovered evidence pointing to premeditation. Surveillance footage captured the couple purchasing cleaning supplies and other items shortly before the crime. Most damning was a video on Sierra's phone, recorded after the murder, showing her and her boyfriend laughing in a car about their actions, making flippant remarks, and mocking the situation. Digital evidence also included text messages and search history indicating plans to flee. The confessional nature of the footage and its casual tone were central to the case. Detectives described the video as one of the most unsettling pieces of evidence they had ever seen. The couple was apprehended in Salt Lake City, Utah, several days after the murder. They were traveling by train and had dyed their hair to alter their appearance. Both were arrested without incident and extradited back to Nevada. Charges included murder, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and evidence tampering. Prosecutors emphasized the methodical planning and callous aftermath as aggravating factors. Despite their young age, both were tried as adults. The defense attempted to argue coercion and immaturity, but the overwhelming evidence, including the confession video, left little room for mitigation. In 2022, Sierra Halseth was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Her boyfriend received the same sentence. The video, described by the judge as haunting and dehumanizing, was instrumental in the court's decision. During sentencing, members of Daniel Halseth's family spoke of the pain, betrayal, and irreversible damage caused by Sierra's actions. The case continues to be cited in discussions around juvenile justice, psychological manipulation, and the dangers of unchecked teen relationships. It remains one of the most high-profile parricide cases in recent U.S. history. Case 8. March 2015, Wisconsin. 17-year-old Ashley Martinson shot her mother and stepfather inside their rural home, then locked herself in her bedroom for hours before fleeing the state. The case gained widespread attention due to her online identity as a horror blogger who wrote violent fiction under the pseudonym Vampchick. The contrast between her creative persona and her real-life crime drew national interest. When investigators examined her digital history, they found writing that eerily mirrored the method and tone of the murders she would later commit. According to Ashley, the killing stemmed from years of mistreatment and fear. She later told investigators that her stepfather was controlling and abusive, and that her mother allowed the behavior to continue. On the morning of March 7, an argument escalated, and Ashley retrieved a shotgun from the family's collection. She shot her stepfather in the chest and face, then turned the weapon on her mother. Afterward, she locked her younger sisters in a bedroom to shield them from the scene, left food and water, and fled the house. Prosecutors later described her actions as deliberate and calculated, not impulsive. Ashley's writings painted a disturbing portrait of her inner world. Her horror blog contained short stories about revenge, blood, and escape, with protagonists often seeking freedom through violence. Friends and classmates recalled that she had withdrawn in the months leading up to the crime. Her stepfather, identified as Thomas Ayers, was a former truck driver with a reputation for strict discipline. Investigators later found evidence supporting Ashley's claims of household tension, including prior reports of domestic disturbances. The relationship between Ashley and her parents had been fractured by fear, resentment, and isolation long before the killings occurred. Following the shootings, Ashley fled to Indiana with her 22-year-old boyfriend. The two were located the next day after authorities traced her cell phone. Police arrested her without resistance at a friend's home. In her possession were notebooks, phone records, and a laptop containing her horror stories. Digital forensics confirmed the authorship of her violent posts, some of which had been written just days before the murders. These writings became key pieces of evidence for prosecutors, establishing a mindset of anger and fantasy-driven revenge. Her case drew comparisons to fictional narratives of teenage rebellion that blurred the line between art and reality. Martinson accepted a plea deal to avoid trial, pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree intentional homicide. Prosecutors acknowledged her claims of abuse but argued that the crime was premeditated. The plea spared her from a possible life sentence. During sentencing, she appeared calm and detached, speaking only briefly about her motives. She expressed that she had lived in fear and felt trapped in her home environment. Psychological evaluations described her as intelligent and remorseful but emotionally stunted, shaped by prolonged trauma and fantasy escapism. The judge described the case as a tragedy born from abuse and obsession. Ashley Martinson was sentenced to 23 years in prison followed by 17 years of supervision. In interviews conducted later, she stated that prison had brought her stability and safety, feelings she said she had never experienced at home. Her words reignited debate about the intersection of trauma, accountability, and youth violence. The case remains a grim example of how chronic domestic abuse and unchecked emotional distress can lead to catastrophic acts of retaliation. In Wisconsin criminal history, Martinson's story stands as a modern cautionary tale about the thin boundary between imagination and reality. Case 9. In October 2016, Georgia police responded to a report that would soon unravel into a confession. 17-year-old Dakota White led officers to the body of his friend, Sam Poss, after admitting he had killed him. The revelation followed an interrogation in which White described wanting to know what it felt like to take a life. Investigators treated the admission as central to the case, citing it as evidence that the killing was not accidental. The community confronted a new and unsettling reality. The defendant had stated curiosity as a motive. Poss's body was located where White indicated, and forensic teams recorded multiple stab wounds to the neck and torso. The scene showed signs of a brief struggle, but no prolonged attempt at concealment. White had indicated the location and guided officers to the exact spot, reducing initial uncertainty about the victim's disposition. Medical examiners established a clear cause of death consistent with the wounds observed. Poss's identity and the immediate circumstances left investigators with a direct trail from confession to physical evidence, framing the inquiry that would follow. Sam Poss had been known to White as an acquaintance and friend within a shared social circle. Those who knew Poss described him as trying to build stability after recent life changes and not prone to confrontations. White and Poss had interacted in school and neighborhood settings, sometimes casually but without documented conflict. The apparent absence of a sustained motive beyond White's expressed curiosity made the case particularly difficult for friends to reconcile. The victim's family later emphasized Poss's plans and potential, underscoring the senselessness of his loss. Investigators secured White's voluntary cooperation and followed leads that corroborated his account. White guided police to the scene, identified the weapon's likely disposal area, and described the sequence of events leading to the attack. Forensic technicians recovered blood evidence consistent with White's statements and matched trace materials to clothing found in his possession. Digital forensics reviewed recent communications and behavior patterns. While no extended plotting was evident, the totality of material aligned with White's confession and the physical record at the scene. Each finding narrowed the gap between admission and proof. White was taken into custody without resistance after directing officers to the location. During subsequent interviews, he elaborated on his motive, describing a desire to experience the act of killing. Prosecutors used his on-scene cooperation and detailed statements as foundational elements of their case. Defense counsel later sought to challenge aspects of the interrogation and to present background evidence regarding White's upbringing and mental state. Nonetheless, the combination of a direct confession and corroborating forensic evidence produced a decisive prosecutorial narrative. In 2018, a jury convicted White of first-degree murder. The court imposed a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, citing the deliberate nature of the act and the defendant's own account of motive. Appeals and post-conviction challenges were subsequently heard, but in 2020, the conviction and sentence were upheld by higher courts. The case was characterized in legal reviews as a prototypical example of a confession-driven prosecution, in which the defendant's expressed intent eliminated reasonable doubt about premeditation. For the victim's community, the outcome offered finality but no comfort. Case 10. Sep 2012, West Virginia. In a remote, quiet part of the state, 16-year-old Joseph Spencer committed an act that left his community reeling. Inside the family's modest home, Spencer murdered his parents and younger sister in what authorities later described as a calculated yet emotionless attack. Neighbors were stunned. There had been no warnings, no history of violence or mental illness. Teenager waited for police to arrive, offering no resistance. When questioned, he admitted everything. Responding officers entered the residence to a grim scene. All three victims, Spencer's mother, father, and 12-year-old sister, were found dead from gunshot wounds. Joseph Spencer had called 911 himself and remained on the scene when authorities arrived. No external signs of forced entry or struggle were evident. The firearm was recovered at the scene. In initial interviews, Spencer stated he had simply decided to kill his family that day, offering no specific reason. The Spencer family was known locally as kind and reserved. They lived in a rural area with limited contact outside of school and work. Teachers described Joseph as quiet, with average grades and no disciplinary issues. There were no reports of abuse or neglect in the household. The killings shocked even law enforcement due to the lack of any prior signs. The absence of motive deepened the mystery. The community mourned not just the loss, but the senselessness of the act. Spencer offered a full confession at the scene. He waived his right to an attorney during initial questioning and detailed the timeline of the killings. Investigators found no drugs, alcohol, or signs of external coercion. The murder weapon belonged to his father and had been kept in a locked case, which Joseph had apparently accessed prior to the killings. Forensic analysis confirmed his account. Psychological evaluations showed no evidence of psychosis or delusions. Prosecutors charged Joseph Spencer as an adult due to the severity of the crime and his age at the time. His defense did not contest the facts, but attempted to argue for mental health treatment instead of a standard prison sentence. The court denied that motion. There was no plea bargain. The trial was brief. Jurors were shown video footage of the confession and evidence from the scene. The case concluded within months of the murders. Joseph Spencer was convicted on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, Spencer offered no apology, remaining silent throughout. The families of the victims, distant relatives and friends, attended the hearing in tears. The court noted the absence of remorse. The case has remained largely unknown outside the state, a chilling reminder of the potential for violence where it is least expected.